And it's really important right now because we are doing more and more in space. We had a record number of launches last year, a couple of hundred. We had a record number of people in orbit. We had a record number of satellites deployed. We have a record number of active satellites on orbit. We're heading toward new platforms. We're doing more in space. And the more we do in space, the more important space safety gets.
Hello, and welcome to the Space Policy Show. I'm Colleen Stover with the Aerospace Corporation. Today's show is the second episode in our six-part series about space safety through a global lens. We started with space weather, a natural safety hazard that all space actors must navigate. And our other shows will explore types of space safety that humans can actually influence, in terms of our own behavior, that is. So our guest today is Carissa Christensen. She's founder and CEO of BryceTech. Carissa is an expert on the space ecosystem. She's a strategic advisor to national security space and the Schriever War Games, also to civil space across multiple NASA centers, and even to industry, of course. She'll be talking to Dr. Angie Bukley, a senior fellow at the Center for Space Policy and Strategy here at the Aerospace Corporation. They'll be exploring just what space safety is anyway, and a bit of what it's not. How do norms, standards, and regulations play into safety? As well, how an Institute for Space Safety could operate to bring the main players together to better support communication and knowledge across the sector. All right, let's go to Dr. Bukley now.
Thanks, Colleen, and we're really happy to have Carissa with us today to talk about this really important topic of space safety. Welcome, Carissa.
Thanks, Angie. I'm really pleased to be here.
Great. Well, let's start our conversation by talking about what is space safety, what space safety is, what it isn't, and why we should even care. I think a lot of people, when you think about space safety, the first thing that comes to mind is human space safety. Our astronauts, people on the International Space Station, the folks on the Chinese space station, but there's a lot more to it than that. So let's talk about, what it is and why we should even care.
So let me start with why we should care. Space safety to me is a really important topic right now because we're in a world where we are using space more and more. And the more we use space, in some ways, the harder it gets. We are seeing more satellites. We've gone from 1,000 active satellites 10 years ago to 10,000 right now. More people in space. We're moving toward more platforms in space as we look at commercial LEO destinations. We're certainly seeing more lunar and lunar activity and even planetary activity in terms of exploration. We're seeing new actors enter space, companies as well as nations. And so space safety matters more because we're doing more. And so there are more risks to be addressed. So what is space safety? I think starting with humans is exactly the right answer. So humans in space, people on the International Space Station, people on other kinds of crewed missions, the safe operations of space systems carrying those humans from launch to life support to reentry, their safety from debris or other space systems or other actors, absolutely. And then there are also the third-party humans, people on the ground who are, experiencing overflight, people at spaceports. But space safety doesn't end with the people physically in space or even the people physically interacting with space systems. Space capabilities affect human lives every day. Satellites provide communications, provide maps, provide imagery in all sorts of applications that affect people's lives. And so disruption to those systems, falling out of service of those systems has consequences for people. So the safe operations of space systems, which kind of gets us into the realms of mission assurance and sustainability, really, there's certainly safety aspects, safety issues that are related to that. Where you draw the line, I think is sometimes a little bit arbitrary, depends on who you are and what you're doing. I also think it's really important to think about safety in terms of the full range of issues. Cyber attacks are a significant source of safety risk for space operations today. Spectrum interference could cause problems for multiple kinds of systems. So space safety is pretty broad, and I think it starts with humans, and I think it goes beyond humans to a pretty wide range of space operations.
Absolutely. And a lot of emphasis, I think when a lot of people think about space missions, I guess the most obvious manifestation of a space mission is the spacecraft itself, the satellite or the spacecraft that's crewed with humans on board. But safety has so much more reach than that. I mean, it starts on the ground, from the processing facility to launch, and then the on-orbit operations, and with human space safety, the reentry operations are very important. So it's not just, it's not just the on-orbit piece that we have to think about, which, of course, that's very important. I read recently where the average American interacts with a space asset over 30 times a day. And that's just moving around in your environment. And that's not even taking into account how space assets are used in farming and, food safety applications, urban monitoring, urban planning, so forth. There's a lot going on there. But you're right, there are so many cross-cutting things, one of which I think another point that we don't think about a lot is workforce and training our workforce appropriately. Any comments on that?
Well, absolutely. So the space workforce is the engine that drives the space economy, without a doubt. And matching the workforce to changing needs is a continual challenge, whether that is training in things like cyber or spectrum risks, or just keeping up with the changing job scope of space systems. Right now, we hire as many computational experts as we do engineering experts in the space ecosystem. And that's a reflection of the evolution of how we conduct space activities. So certainly all of those topics are relevant.
Absolutely. So, and space situational awareness as well. That's really coming to top of mind for many organizations around the world, just to understand what's going on out there. And some of the recent near misses on spacecraft that are uncontrollable point to the fact that space situational awareness is a very important element in this whole space safety environment.
Space situational awareness is really interesting. When you think about, for example, awareness of debris or inactive space objects as well as active space objects, we've been managing debris for decades. Why is it so much more a problem now and in the future? Certainly partly because we see more satellite activity and we expect that to be a potential source of debris, but also the existing debris environment is more significant as we go from 1,000 active satellites to 10,000 active satellites. And so I think that goes back to that idea that safety is the topic of the moment because of the increasing activity in space.
Yes, and those large constellations will provide vital services to people on Earth, and so we want to make sure that they can operate in safe environment without having to worry about running into each other. So space situational awareness indeed is incredibly important. So let's chat a little bit about how national and international standards play into safe space operations.
Standards, not the most glamorous subject, certainly. Although I will give a shout out to Michael Lopez Alegria, who just conducted a standards meeting from the International Space Station. Certainly, I think ups the engagement and profile of a kind of meeting that is not necessarily the most exciting typically. Standards may not be glamorous, but they're absolutely critical, as we all know, from a performance standpoint, from an economic standpoint, from a safety standpoint. Having a consistent understanding of the rules of the road, having systems that are interoperable and predictable and behave the way that they are intended to. So much of our quality control and quality assurance processes are affected by compliance with standards. We designed a system that works on paper, and it works some of the time in the real world, but some of the time it doesn't. So what's the disconnect there? And the disconnect is a compliance, the disconnect is design standards, the disconnect is performance. So anything we can do to reduce that gap, to reduce the number of times that system that works on paper doesn't work in the real world, that's a huge benefit. And I think that that's a huge safety benefit.
Absolutely. As is norms of behavior.
Ah.
That's a topic that's receiving a lot of attention these days too. Any comments on norms of behavior and how that might play into the safety environment?
Norms of behavior is such an interesting topic, and Aerospace Corporation has done some really nice work on norms of behavior, as have others. The question of, first, are there norms of behavior in space? And certainly I would argue there are. There are soft norms. There are expectations that have evolved through decades of commercial operations and civil exploration and national security operations. Things like, normally, you don't come too close to my satellite. However, what exactly does that mean? How is that operationalized in a more concrete and specific way? We don't have a widely agreed upon standard that says X kilometers is the closest you can come. And all of the other attributes of coming too close, and how fast are you coming at me, and how do you inform me, and how long do you stay in that window, right? Figuring out what we've all agreed to as the right way to behave is a hard problem, because there are so many actors in all those different sectors and different nations, different countries. So even if everyone had agreement today on roughly the right answer, memorializing that across all those institutions would be hard. And spoiler alert, we don't have agreement today on the right answer to all those things.
No, we don't. And it's not just how close can I come to you? It's things like deorbiting after your mission is complete. And, I think companies and organizations are paying a lot more attention now to post-mission disposal and things like that than they have been in the past. And I think that's really, really important. And there's so many things floating around out there, used rocket bodies and so forth, that we just have to kind of wait for them to come down, and some will come down in our lifetime and some will come down in hundreds of years. But still they're there and could be a potential problem for on-orbit operations. So,
and I think one of the things that's really interesting about debris is, when you think about debris, there are really, from a policy and response standpoint, there are two categories of debris. There's the debris that exists now that was created historically, and there's debris that might be created in the future. And as we implement regulations, as we implement norms of behavior, as we are more attentive to this question, managing debris that might be created in the future by assigning responsibility to the entity that created it and expecting or legally demanding a response from that entity is more and more feasible. The debris that exists now, much more difficult to say, to force a response from a responsible party. I think that kind of pushes that debris particularly into the safety circle because it's a shared problem that if we solve it, benefits everyone. And so I think that there's a bit of a different level of thinking that's needed for existing debris that really aligns it with the kind of thinking we need to do about safety.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of very tricky policy issues that come into play when you start talking about debris removal and who can remove what debris. And how do you get permission, for example, to remove a piece of debris that's, that you didn't launch, but that might interfere with something that you have on orbit already. So there are many, many things to think about when we start talking about debris removal. So let's kind of talk now a little bit more about the economic, political, and security implications, and some of the benefits that we derive from promoting safe operations. And in this regard, I'm thinking about everything from ground operations to launch to on-orbit operations to disposal to reentry, whenever that's appropriate. What are some of the benefits of promoting safe operations that you can think of?
So I think the place to start there is with recognition that there are many space safety oriented organizations. NASA's Office of Safety and Mission Assurance, or its the NASA Engineering and Safety Center. There are defense and intelligence organizations thinking about space safety. There are certainly standards bodies. There are international groups. So this is a topic that is of significant interest and certainly is being addressed in many ways by those groups. I think that you would be hard pressed to find any one of those groups that said all safety problems are solved. We have fully adequate resources. We don't have any gaps, and we communicate completely with every other actor who's working on space safety. So I think that as we think about the benefits of an enhanced approach to safety, one of the first benefits is we lever up the work that all those existing institutions are doing. I think that more broadly, as we think about a more systematic approach to space safety, we think about cost savings. We don't spend as much on quality assurance or quality control because we've implemented approaches that improve the technology that we're using so we have more predictable outcomes. Our systems engineering is more consistent because we've seen our workforce trained up in a shared perspective on space safety. So our implementation is of higher quality. I think there are so many ways in which safer operations result in cost savings or enhanced performance. And, this is one of those topics that's easy to talk about because I'm not sure anybody is sitting out there watching this saying, no, safety is terrible. It doesn't help. It's not useful. Right. It's sort of a universally recognized good. The question is the specifics of how, who does what, and I really do think a big challenge is connecting and integrating all of those actors in different countries, in different sectors, with different missions, finding a way to again lever up what they're doing by connecting and helping them communicate and interact.
Absolutely. So yeah, there's a lot to think about, a lot of benefits for safe operations, and I think a lot of it comes down to responsibility of the launching state, the operators, and so forth. And I think we've gained a lot more understanding recently of the importance of, developing these types of standards and norms of behavior, so as not to limit the use of low Earth orbit or any Earth orbit for that matter. There are a lot of benefits associated with space safety. So do you see a way that we can get the technology and the analysis and so forth to influence how these norms of behaviors, how these standards are developed in general?
Well, that's interesting. It's a really interesting question because we often sort of assume that technology drives. And when you're talking about space activities, absent technology, absent the ability to access space and operate in space, all, start to finish, it's technology enabled. So that's a reasonable view. Technology first is a reasonable view at some level. I would argue that for space safety, technology is supportive. Space safety is around institutions, it's around processes, it's around commitment, it's around agreement that creates or supports commitment, and technology can enable space, the implementation of safer systems. But I think that technology supports, and there's got to be those institutional elements are really what are critical for space safety.
Yes, absolutely. And as you alluded to, the devil's in the details of how this unfolds. So, well, let's talk about the idea of a Space Safety Institute and how that might facilitate the sharing of information, the sharing of technology, and how that might play into developing standards and ensuring that we maintain a safe environment in which to operate, not just in low Earth orbit, but all the way through cislunar and beyond.
As you know, Angie, I think highly of the idea of an independent Space Safety Institute that could serve as a resource for the community. And I characterize that very specifically. There is a strong space safety community. I don't think that there's a need to supplant or replace that community, far from it. I do think that that community is addressing a lot of challenging problems, and an institute that could provide a way to facilitate communication between and among organizations that typically don't have bilateral engagement, an institute that could be kind of a clearinghouse to say, you have a technology problem, for example. Here's a company with a technology that fits what you're looking for, or this group at NASA has expertise that might suit what you need, or hey, the Institute has access to technology experts that might be able to help you solve that problem. I think that could be very valuable. As far as standards development goes, the multiple standards development bodies that are working, they're typically working a subset of the full range of issues. Thank goodness, because no single organization could reasonably take on the breadth of safety issues that we've been talking about. But again, an institute, an organization that could connect those standards making bodies, that could help them communicate what they're working on to build shared understanding across the safety community and across the broader workforce. I think that those would be very valuable functions. So I think that there is a real opportunity here to step up the effectiveness of our space safety efforts.
And well, as you know, the Aerospace Corporation has stood up a Space Safety Institute, and we're trying to work to understand better what that organization should do and shouldn't do. Do you have any thoughts on what a Space Safety Institute should do or shouldn't do? I mean, I know we're not ever going to replace the existing space safety entities that already exist. I mean, NASA's got this down really well, but a lot of people don't have insight into, you know, what NASA is doing. And there are other organizations that do space safety, but it's, if you're new in the business, you know, if you're a startup and you want to make sure that you're in compliance, you know, there's really no one place you can go to ask questions. So that would be one example, but I'm sure you know of, or have thought of many others that we can think of.
The idea of a Space Safety Institute connected with Aerospace Corporation, what it should do is exactly what you're talking about. I would characterize that as support. Support the space safety efforts of existing organizations, of emergent organizations, of companies that are new to the industry and just participating, and need to figure out what does space safety mean and who do I need to talk to and how do I comply. And every one of these companies could come to a compliance, could walk a compliance pathway and get there. But it is so much less expensive and the outcome is so much better if you see the successful path that others have walked and you can apply that. So there's a very pragmatic sort of a best practices and tips aspect that I see as really useful. Connect members of the community to one another. So support, connect, and what it shouldn't do, it shouldn't compete. There's no need to, it would be very wasteful, in my view, I think in the broad view, very wasteful to try to duplicate what's happening now. The problem isn't we need a different version of what's happening now. The problem is we have a growing problem and we're under-resourced to solve it right now. So if we can support and enhance the work of all of those existing entities and support the players that need to implement safe-based systems, that I think would be a high value add.
Yeah, absolutely. And letting people know what's going on in a broader sense, because unless, you know, you have the staff and the time to start looking across all of the entities that are touching space safety and have insight into, you know, what's happened before, I mean, that can be a really daunting challenge, especially for a smaller company. And you know, a Space Safety Institute that you could go to and perhaps ask for questions, find out who you even need to be talking to. That would be significantly value added.
I think the Space Safety Institute could function like your personal astronaut friend, that you could pick up the phone and call and ask those questions about safety issues. And as you say, who's doing what's happening, what are the requirements that affect me, how do I comply? And again, not then to do that work necessarily, but to say, here's a company, here's an entity, here's an organization, here's an agency that can help you with what you're trying to achieve. I like that idea a lot in a world where we're doubling our launch activity, we're 10 times increasing our LEO satellites. We're looking at multiple platforms. The world, the activity in space is so much more robust than it ever has been. I think it's time.
Yeah, such a dynamic environment that we're working in. It's pretty remarkable. And one of the important things that we need to think about is not reinventing the wheel, because a lot of this stuff has already been done and there's documentation. And you know, if there's sort of a clearinghouse, if you will, that, you know, has information about the work that's been done and can share that, not necessarily do the work, I think that you know, could lead to some cost savings, especially for some of the newer organizations that are coming into the space enterprise.
And I can envision long-standing space actors who have developed space safety protocols or capabilities, have had experiences that have taught them, this is the kind of topic where members of the community like to come together, like to share that, both for, out of a respect for and a value for the mission outcomes that we're all chasing, that we're all working toward. And also, it's not a bad thing if you're a large company to be known as the company that contributed that, the Volvo model of Volvo making available safety technology for seatbelts really is a brand enhancer. And I think that there's no institution right now that could kind of elicit that sort of response.
Agreed. Well, Carissa, thank you so much. This is a super important topic. We've touched on some really important issues, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. Any closing remarks?
Angie, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you, and I really hope that we get to revisit this topic and talk about what the Institute has done.
Well, thank you very much, and we will keep you posted.
Thanks.
So thank you very much, and that's it for us, and back over to Colleen.
Okay, thank you to Angie and Carissa for bringing these important discussions to our audience. If anyone would like more information on Aerospace's Space Safety Institute, check it out on our website, of course. Remember, this show is part of our 6-part series on space safety through a global lens. So you can follow us or subscribe to be notified of future releases. They're all available for free to the public on YouTube and most podcast platforms. Lots of topics to explore there. You can also find more of the center's in-depth research at csps.aerospace.org. Thank you to James Liggins, our technical director. Until next time, everyone. Thanks.